I was a development executive at this production company, and I was sleeping very little and reading tons of screenplays. And I got a phone call from a screenwriter's representative that said that he had Leonardo's next movie, which was not an unusual phone call to get. I probably got it a half dozen times a day. What was unique about this one was the movie that he was pitching, and it went a little bit like this. In this movie, Leonardo would play an oil company lobbyist, we'll say for BP. He has a girlfriend who is a meteorologist for a local DC station. And she's going to break up with him because she doesn't like the fact that her boyfriend is sort of involved in global warming and contributing to global warming. And this has all been brought to a head by the fact that there's a giant hurricane coming from the coast of Africa that is going to slam into the east coast of the United States, destroying pretty much everything, Katrina-level damage from Maine to Myrtle Beach. Leo, feeling guilty about this breakup and his involvement in the destruction of the world, does a little more research and discovers that as this hurricane is going to pass through the Atlantic, it is going to cross over a long dormant, though now active volcano that will spew toxic ash into the air, which will be whipped into some sort of biological weapon by the sheer ferocity of the storm. Essentially, he was pitching me this movie, which will never come to a theater near you. And it was at this point that I interrupted him, and I was like, so basically you're pitching me Leo versus the toxic superstorm that will destroy humanity. And his response, and I wish I was making this up, was, but when you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I actually had the guy send me the script and read probably 30 pages before I was sure that it was as bad as it sounded on the phone. And Superstorm is an extreme example, admittedly, but it's not an unusual one. And most pitches aren't as easy to dismiss as that one. For example, faced with an unplanned pregnancy, a high school senior makes an unusual decision regarding her unborn child. And that's, Juno, which made $230 million worldwide, was nominated for 4 Oscars and won 1 for Best Original Screenplay. Another example, a Mumbai teen who grows up in the slums becomes a contestant on the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Obviously, that's Slumdog Millionaire, which made $377 million worldwide, was nominated for 10 Oscars and won 8, including Best Screenplay, adapted, I believe. Or another, a guy walks around with a puppet of a beaver on his hand and treats it as though it is a living creature. And that is actually a movie that will probably come out later this fall called, appropriately enough, The Beaver, and stars Mel Gibson and Jodie Foster, and is going to be directed by Jodie Foster. And it's a brilliant screenplay, honestly. So, I know, right? #1 on the blacklist, actually. So a large part of your job as a development executive is separating the superstorms of the world from the Slumdog Millionaires, and more generally, the writers who do Superstorm from the writers who can do Slumdog Millionaire. And obviously the easy way to distinguish these things is just to read them, and that would be great if it were possible. But the reality is that last year, the Writers Guild of America registered some 50,000 new pieces of material. Of those, maybe 5,000 sort of clear various filters through agencies, management companies, screenplay competitions. And you're still required as a development executive to sift through all of those to identify the 1 or 2 that you want to invest the financial resources or your time into trying to make it one of the 150 and dropping films that the major studios release on a yearly basis. One analogy I've used in the past is a little bit like walking into some sort of members-only bookstore that has all of the best and exclusive titles in the world, but it's all organized alphabetically and all of the covers are exactly the same. And your job is basically to not come home until you find the best book there. And you do the best with what you have, and it really becomes triage. You take every phone call from every agent and representative telling you that Superstorm is the next Avatar, and you sort of, and you get off the phone and you try to discount how much to believe it based on how many things, that bad scripts you've been convinced to read because of their lies in the past. And you troll screenplay competitions for semifinalists hoping to find a diamond in the rough. But generally speaking, you end up relying on the wisdom of the people who are in exactly the same situation you are. Read Anything Good Lately is the anthem of the overworked Hollywood film executive. That conversation happens, I have it dozens of times a week. It probably happens aggregate in the entire community thousands of times a week. And you're hoping, of course, that the people that you're asking have you read anything good lately, are the most wired in town. They read a lot, they have great taste, and they're having that same conversation with everyone else they know, and that those people are of the same description. But even then, and at the time I felt like I was in a pretty good situation talking to those people, you have the overwhelming sense that you're missing something, that there's a great script out there that you're not privy to, or God forbid, you wake up tomorrow morning on the cover of Variety, there's been $1 million screenplay sale that your boss is like, why weren't you in front of that? And that was pretty much where I was in 2005, in an anonymous office on Sunset Boulevard, staring down that sort of anonymized bookstore and having read nothing but bad scripts for months. And I took that to mean two things. The first is that I was not doing very well at my job. And the second was that my career for the rest of my life was going to be reading bad scripts, which was not really what I had in mind when I left management consulting and threw in my law school applications and went to LA. And worse, I was about to go on vacation for 2 weeks and I didn't want to read a bunch of bad scripts. So one evening, right before I left town, I emailed 75 people with whom I regularly had that read anything good lately conversation with, and asked them to send me a list of up to 10 of their favorite screenplays that met 3 conditions. The first was that they loved the screenplay. And the second was that the film version of it would not be in theaters by the end of the year. And lastly, that it had been written in the previous 12 months, or had come to be known in the previous 12 months. And I was shocked to find out that pretty much everybody responded. Out of the 75 people that I initially emailed, only 3 didn't respond. And several of them said, oh, a friend of mine wants to be involved in this, could you, let them participate? So I think what was unique about this was that this was not a, hey, have you read anything that might make me tons of money? It wasn't, have you read anything that might make me look good for my boss? It was, tell me what you love. And in a film business that is largely triage and can be very cynical, but is still populated by people who came to the place they are because they love movies, it was a rare opportunity. And so the final vote count was 90, and the first blacklist was born, and there were 186 scripts on that list. Of those, all of them got in at least 1 vote, and I gave it a vaguely ironic name and sent it out and went on vacation. These are the top 5 scripts from that first list. I don't know if you can see it, but it's Things We Lost in the Fire, Juno, Lars and the Real Girl, Only Living Boy in New York, and Charlie Wilson's War. Now, of those 5, 4 have been made. Only Living Boy in New York has not, and it's still moving towards production. In 2007, both Diablo Cody for Juno and Nancy Oliver were nominated for Oscars, and Diablo obviously won. All 3 of them are very much in-demand writers right now, and of those 186, 68 of them have been made into feature films. And that number continues to grow because these things are still good and out there. Today, the annual list runs through blacklist.com. It's Blacklist with no vowels, run by Dino. And in 2009, over 330 executives participated, which really represents about 60% of the people that work at major studios and the production companies that generally service them with product. Some other highlights from the previous Blacklist are these movies. Many of which are very good, some of which are not as good, but they've all been made, which is a miracle in Hollywood oftentimes. And the list has become something of an institution. Industry trade publications refer to projects when they're announced as blacklist scripts. There's a good number of production companies and major studios that the day the list comes out hold blacklist meetings to pour over the list to make sure they haven't missed a project that might be something they want to make or find a writer that they might want to work with. A large percentage of people in the business now use the list to guide their reading over the holiday vacation in the same way that I did when I made the list. And recently I was told by a now friend of mine who's a director who was recently nominated for an Academy Award that there are 3 directors who every year have a conference call and they all live on different continents to discuss what scripts were on the blacklist, which frankly just floored me. But in a purely practical sense, the list itself shines a very bright spotlight on these screenplays and the writers who do them. For screenplays that haven't been picked up by a studio, it really can mean second life. A lot of times, and I do this too, you get a screenplay, you read it, you dismiss it, and it's gone from your mind. And when you're a writer and you're sort of toiling away in obscurity, whether it's in a sort of shoebox apartment in Burbank or a mansion in the Hollywood Hills, it's a very isolated experience, and you don't get feedback, and you don't get an opportunity to say, no, this is actually really good, and here's why I think it can work. And so in many ways, it sort of recreates a conversation about these things and makes people sort of take a second look. And as you can see from some of these and other scripts that have made the list, it actually does happen that they get rebirth. And a second component of that is that a lot of these writers who, again, toiling in obscurity, just trying to make a living being a writer while maintaining second and sometimes third jobs, this is an opportunity for everyone in town to instantly know who you are. There's studio heads that read the list and request meetings with the writers that are on it, and for a lot of young writers in particular, they get taken seriously in a way that they really never had before. And that's actually something particularly gratifying for me. I came to Hollywood because I love great writing and great directing, and so to be able to sort of contribute to the, at least the awareness of those things has been amazing. And this is all great, but I also want to talk a little bit about what the Blacklist is not. A lot of people, I think, have a misconception that the Blacklist is sort of a catalog of screenplays that if you make them, you'll make tons of money and win tons of awards. And that's really, unfortunately, not the case. I wish it was. But as you can see from this list, like I said, some of them bomb. But more than anything, I think the Blacklist is a snapshot of what Hollywood is reading and liking in a given year. And as such, it sort of puts a mirror in front of those 300 executives that participate and makes them consider bigger questions about what we like, what works, and why. And in a business where it is largely triage, where you're constantly trying to sift through those 50,000 screenplays and figure out what you're going to spend your time on, and when you do have time to think big picture, it's about the fact that revenue is down, DVD revenue is cratering, costs are rising incessantly, and video games and the internet continue to incur on consumers' leisure time and spend. Hopefully the Blacklist sort of forces a quiet conversation about what works, what we care about, what creativity is, and what stories we want to tell. As you may notice, I'm a little bit reluctant to overreach about the role that the Blacklist plays, but I do want to tell one story that is only a little self-congratulatory. In 2005, when the first list came out, there was a young writer who was 25 years old named Josh Zedemer. At the time, he was working as a secretary to an inactive producer. He was teaching drums on the side so that he could make rent, basically. And in what little spare time he had after that, he was writing. And he wrote a screenplay called Villain that was a small, contained thriller that ended up in the #4 script on the 2006 list. And I had not read it during the whole of 2006, but in preparing my sort of take-home read for the holidays, I added it to my pile and made a point of reading it, as did my boss. When we came back in January, there was a project we were looking to fill with a writer. And we both said, this guy's actually really good, we should meet with him. And he came in and gave an amazing pitch on the project. And we hired him over several very big A-list writers. And this is someone who had never done a sort of, write for work job ever. And that script, called The Infiltrator, ended up #4 on the 2007 list. Since then, Josh has done a production rewrite on the most recent Bond movie, on Sherlock Holmes, and a draft of the Dune the Dune remake at Paramount, and the most recent Bourne installment at Universal, where I work. And he's doing quite well. And he teaches drums now for pleasure and not for money. And he's a working writer, and he's a good friend of mine. And I think that that's been probably the most gratifying thing, is seeing people like Josh, who are incredibly talented writers, and who I genuinely do believe would make it on their own, but perhaps hastening that process a little bit, and hopefully making better movies for us all to pay our $15 to go see. So that's that.